There is a point in your life where you realize, I'm either going to think about a dream forever or I'm going to do it.
Welcome to Life Reimagined. I'm so excited to share this conversation with a guest who is someone I feel very fortunate to call a good friend, Dr. Matt Asciutto. We connected about 1.5 years ago, both as podcasters. His podcast is called The Greatest Profession. But vet med was not even a thought when he was younger, and it was a second career. He started in professional improv and later became a veterinarian. He discusses how improv skills are useful in veterinary medicine, and you'll see Matt often improvs his way into many scenarios. But even at a young age, he did have this strong affinity for both an artistic side and a science side. In our conversation, Matt explains an underlying value that helped him find joy in his journey so far and is moving him into the future, and that is around human connection and a supportive, collaborative approach to doing life. He is about to open his first hospital in Colorado and publish a book. I also wonder if we have coined a new term, collaborative-based medicine. So many good things in this episode, so let's get to the conversation with Dr. Matt Asciutto. I heard you say that from very early on, you knew that there were kind of two big things that you wanted to have in your life, and that was around comedy and then science. So do you mind sharing a little bit about little Matt, maybe a little before high school and then into high school, because I think that might be helpful in kind of understanding those aspects of you as you were starting to form what you wanted to do in your career.
Yeah. There was always this thing of, I was always fascinated by comedy. I guess I always think about it as art. Like I needed the arts and then also the sciences both simultaneously. But you're right. I mean, like a huge piece of it was comedy. I mean, when I was a kid, it was Charlie Chaplin films, and I would like stand in front of the TV on Saturday mornings watching I Love Lucy reruns, as well as cartoons and things like that. But it was just like this thing of, I was always compelled by comedy and like the magic of it. But I was also simultaneously, enraptured by the cosmos. And my mom was a speech pathologist and working with head trauma patients and stroke patients. And I loved how like the brain works, like the mystery of the brain. And so a lot of that growing up ended up being kind of both of those. I would fall in love with the science thing, and then I would join the high school improv team. And that kind of brought me to, the end of high school where I'm like, I don't actually know what I want to do. And honestly, I'm going to turn 40 in June, and I still don't really know what I want to do. So.
And I think that's perfectly okay. So,
yeah.
And again, as I was looking and I saw a lot of this neuroscience and neuropsychology in your background, I wondered if you ever dug in a little bit into like the neuropsychology of comedy. Have you ever gotten into that side of thing and the psychology of comedy and laughter and how that kind of comes into life?
It's such a great question. I think that I've intentionally avoided actual like peer-reviewed literature surrounding it. I have looked into a lot of the utilities of humor, and team building and leadership and, stuff like that, resilience. I looked into that because I think it's super appropriate and applicable to what we're doing as veterinarians. But when I was growing up, there's like a magic to it that I didn't want to disrupt, if that makes sense. Now, that's not to say that I was never analytical about it. One of the things I really loved was to kind of tease apart a joke or a bit. Or when I was doing improv, we would have like these very specific games. Like, have you ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's like, you've got the two guys on the stools talking about an album that doesn't exist yet. And then, goes to someone who's singing songs from that album. Like the bits and like, what is the gimmick and how does the gimmick work and what are the mechanics of it was always something that I loved. In fact, when I first started doing improv professionally, one of the things I did is I put together this probably 25-page document that went through all of the games and like why I thought that they worked and like how to highlight the gimmick and how to really, take advantage of the mechanics and all that. So like, I do think that there's some bit of, like the flipped expectation and the surprise bit and all of those things. But I think I did it on more of like a intuitive level and not like a scientific level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have also
an appreciation for improv. I mean, I think the humor in the TV shows, you mentioned I Love Lucy.
Mhm.
I loved the shows, and Whose Line Is It Anyway is a great example too. I think some of the things that were the funniest to me and still are today are the shows where there's like a live audience
Mhm.
and the actors themselves get cracked up. Like they start laughing at themselves and what's going
Yeah.
on. I think part of it is just that appreciation of watching people enjoying the moment,
Yeah.
just not really thinking too seriously. You're having fun and you're usually with other people. And I think
Mhm.
that was just something that was really pure to me. And when somebody asked me, probably when I was younger, this has probably changed a little bit because I'm just old now. But when I was, before I had a lot of other people in my life, and it was mainly my immediate family, if you asked me what was my favorite thing in the world,
Mm.
it would be to hear my dad laugh. And there's
Uh-huh.
just something really special about
Yeah.
watching people enjoy something,
Yeah.
and that to me is really special, and I think if, I'm really reflecting and continuing on the things that I enjoy today, like this podcast,
Mm.
I love hearing people's story. It doesn't even have to be veterinary, where people are just passionate about
Mm.
something, and they're
Yeah.
just getting excited about talking about it, and it I don't have to be interested in it, but it's watching people light up and,
Yeah.
again, enjoy something,
Yeah.
and I don't know, is that part of it too that you have kinda noticed, or what is it about comedy that you talked about this magic, right? And I
Mhm.
guess maybe that's what I'm trying to describe a little bit more in depth is
Yeah.
how I see it as magic. And improv especially, because I also heard you say that improv is probably your most valuable skill that you have developed. So
Mhm.
what is it about improv in particular?
Man, I think that you've so many points you just touched on. And I think that, yes, there is something about this kind of we're in this together magic. Like when you're looking at, let's say, sketch comedy in particular, like the Carol Burnett show, which
Yeah.
again, I know that these are dated references, but even at the time, I was watching them on like
Yeah, me too.
PBS. You know what I mean? Like,
Me
so-
too. I grew up with them. TV
yeah,
Land, Nick at Night, that kind of stuff.
exactly. And it's like when you watch these professionals, like these people who are doing their best to like keep it together and they can't quite, then you know that you've kind of elevated to this, this extra space that now everyone is ensorcelled. But I do think that there's this thing about comedy where it is a true connection. It's like a deep connection to, in those sketch circumstances, it's a deep connection to the other person. Same with improv. But even when you're crafting a joke, it's like a deep connection to the underpinnings of an idea. Like in order for you to really take something and then flip the expectation or have a little bit of curly Q at the end that makes it humorous, you have to really embody that thing. And so it's like you are almost living life or in a way that is so deep. It's like you're tapping into some deep part of humanity in order to even find the comedy, if that makes sense. And yes, like in terms of improv, I mean, absolutely. One of the big things, especially watching it, because I watched it for years. I watched the Whose Line, like the old British version before the Drew Carey version, and watching those people connect with each other in order to create something that never existed before I mean, it is magical. And it's like you have to really be paying attention to something or the other person and really commit to this idea. And then, just being with this group that seems so close. And I would juxtapose that with, I'm standing in front of my TV in an empty house, basically, right? Like we moved around a ton when I was a kid. My mom was a young professional, a young woman, high ranking within the hospital administration, which meant that she had a really hard job and didn't come home, as much as I would like. Right. So it's like, as I got older and older, she worked harder and harder and I was still alone. And so seeing that connection through this little glowing TV screen, was something that I could kind of transport myself into, whereas I didn't necessarily have that myself. Yeah. So in terms of improv, I mean, there's so many reasons why I think that it is of like the greatest things that I've ever done. But a big piece of it is about listening and connection and adding and this kind of base idea where it's like this thing that we're doing now is the reality. Let's all agree to it instead of fighting it so that we can kind of move forward together, connecting to the people around you, using sort of the basis of like whatever this other person is feeling or believing or saying, like that is real and true. And I should say yes to that instead of trying to like oppose it and tell them why they're wrong. It allows you to sort of look at things a little bit differently and more creatively, I think. But there's just so much to it. But those are just kind of the things on the top of my head.
I definitely want to talk more about how you have used some of these improv skills in your veterinary career as well.
Mm.
But just, I mean, already what you've said, like you don't really know what you want to be when you grow up. I think Sarah Boston on your episode with her, she said you just kind of live this improv life in general. Is
Yeah.
that, you don't know what's next. You just say, why not? Or
Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah.
with a lot of things in life.
Yeah.
And I think that can be a good thing as long as you embrace some of the other things along with it, such as the not having to feel like you control everything. And,
Right.
you stumble across all sorts of adventures. And that's kind of what it sounded like. But before I leave in kind of that high school time for you, one
Mm.
of the things I noticed is, well, one, you kind of, at least it sounds like you have that perfect resume as a high school kid's supposed to have is like you are well balanced. You do the athletic stuff. You are cross country, track and field. You are improv club, drama club, and
Yeah.
science. You're just like a very well rounded high school student. But I heard that you kind of had to be forced into the improv and you
Oh yeah.
didn't really feel like you were good, but obviously other people did since they carried you to the improv club or something, like physically carried you to try to force you to go.
Yeah.
So what was it about eventually accepting, okay, let me just walk so I'm not embarrassed to improv, but actually having fun with it and doing a lot more with it, as a career, teaching it and all those things.
Man, what deep research you've done.
Nice stalker, knows now.
I did not. I don't know. Anyone knew that I did cross country once upon a time. That's very funny. um, Man, having fun with it. So I don't know that so the timelines between like having fun with it and embracing it and then doing other things with it's all over the place. I think I realized quickly enough in high school that it gave me a place to belong. I ultimately became the guy who did improv, right? Like one of the guys, and they kept putting me on stage, like much to my protests. They were just like, no, we need you on there. You're like one of our core people. And I swear I do not recollect saying a single thing in any of those shows. Like I don't feel like I contributed much, but they seem to, I don't know, feel like I was of some benefit. But for me, where the enjoyment was, so I was still resisting while I started enjoying it. Because what I realized is that by being there, like you're on stage, you kind of have this front row to seeing all your friends do amazing, funny things on this stage, and then seeing an audience respond to that. So like what I ended up embracing, even when I was in scenes, right? I could just take whatever the offers were and then just lob them back so that it became somebody else's turn to kind of, strike it over the net or whatever. As in, I ended up doing a lot of supporting in part because I just didn't want to be the spotlight. It was my way of like avoiding doing improv whatsoever. But by doing that, it actually, and maybe this is why in retrospect, they liked having me on stage, but like, I gave it back to them. I felt like it enhanced the overall experience, but I got to watch like this amazing thing that they did with this idea that I kind of like tossed up. So I really enjoyed it from like a spectator perspective, even back then. And then I would still resist for years. Like even after I graduated high school and I was doing it professionally, probably the first 2 years of it, I still felt the same way. I was not enjoying, being there, but I was enjoying like watching and I got like a front row seat and I got to like set up other people, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it wasn't until later, like much later, that I probably really realized that these skills were things that I could use as like a human being to navigate through the world. Because as a young 20 something, like you don't know anything. Like well, at least I didn't. And as I kind of got older, I was like, oh, as it turns out, the way that I'm approaching this thing, which is just default because of improv, turns out to be kind of like a good way of thinking about it and has helped sort of since. So yeah, I mean, years and years and years went by between all those.
The unique thing about improv comedy is that you don't usually do that alone. You've got
No.
other people. And I think a lot of life is interacting with other human beings. And so if you've got a skill set that allows you to better interact with other human beings,
Yeah.
then just think about how applicable it can be in so many different aspects. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. I've never done stand up. Mostly because I'm scared, right? And no one has carried me up to an open mic. But like,
All right.
but the thing that I love about improv is the interactive bit. And like the higher and higher, so like this is, years are passing now, but when I was doing it on the highest level that I interacted with it, in Chicago, the best part is doing it then with other people and seeing them at the top of their game, right? So now you get to support these amazing other people and again, kind of be a part of that magic, as it were. Yeah. It's all about the interactions with the others.
Exactly. And so you said your improv was a little all over the place, and I think you still had in your mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, to pursue more of the human medicine side
Mm.
of things, getting into college. And so I would love to know a little bit about your college experience. And I did hear in one podcast that in general, you said you didn't love your college experience. And so, if you don't mind sharing, what was kind of that experience? How were you trying to navigate this very interesting time of life of, people do have these expectations that we figure out what we're going to do in life and come out with this very clear cut job. How are you kind of navigating life at that point, and especially some of the things that kind of brought you to your next kind of career decision?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what ended up happening in high school for me was I ended up with a pretty broad group of friends that were probably the most interesting and smartest and kindest and, thoughtful people that I have known since. And many of them I'm still friends with today. But at the time, I just assumed that like this is what all friends must be like. Like every person must be as awesome as these human beings. And so I was really looking forward to college. I'm like, oh man, it's only going to get better from here. But as it turns out, I just didn't realize how unique that situation was. And so my first couple of years, it was tough because, it's hard to meet, go basically start over in terms of friendships. And then the kind of the second bit is I just couldn't find those people, again, not knowing how rare it was. And I would say coupled with that I just didn't feel intellectually, I don't know, challenged in the way that I thought that I was going to be. It's not to say that like the classes themselves weren't hard, but there's this thing that happens once you kind of jump into college where it's just like, all right, you got a couple classes a day and then you got some free time. So study. Like, I didn't know how to do that. I had never done that before, right? Like high school was just kind of like I'll do the homework on the way to class. And so so it was like a rude awakening kind of on a bunch of fronts, to the point that in the middle of my sophomore year, I was on the quarter system, but at the end of winter quarter of my sophomore year, I was like, I think that I'm either going to have to drop out of college or go all in and like just figure out how to make this thing happen. So I was really toying with that. And it was at that time that I applied to be a dance instructor because I just needed like something. I needed some job that wasn't like I was doing improv at that time, but that was still in the era where I just didn't feel super comfortable with it. I was pretty young overall. I just needed something. And I think that, ultimately I made the decision to like go for it. But I think that the reason that I ended up saying, hey, I'm going to double down and actually like, study and do the work and find ways to actually get through this thing was not because of some sort of career aspiration, but because of like this thing of, it's a thing that my mom always wanted me to do, like ever since I was a kid, right? I would watch her. I mean, she's an immigrant and I watched her kind of reach the height of her field in her mid-20s, right? And I'm like, well, that's only a few years away and I still have no idea what's going on. And so, so I don't know. I just wanted to like kind of make that dream at least come true for her. And the actual career aspiration was secondary. When it came to like career though, I mean, earlier when I was applying to school, the reason that I went to UCSD, one of the reasons I went to UCSD, University of California in San Diego, is because my like idol in the neuroscience fields, Dr. Ramachandran, he was one of the professors there. And ultimately, after I went to some of his classes, after the doubling down and actually doing the work, I ended up in his lab and did work with him, and it was really that was like an amazing kind of end to college. But man, oh man, the beginning was terrible.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
and that also helps me understand that all the different things that you were doing during those years, because
yeah,
I was pulling, I was like, "My goodness, he stayed busy with all these
yeah,
different things." And I even did see a lot of different types of teaching roles. So
yes,
everything from helping children with autism to instructor for youth theater, stuff like that. And again, on all these conversations I've heard you have, teaching also seems to be a big thing for you as well.
yeah.
So how did you kind of discover that? What is it about teaching that you kind of enjoyed?
Yeah. I think I've always it's probably a very similar thing to why my favorite part of improv is setting up the other person. I think that at that time, I was definitely wrestling with what do I want to do, right? Do I strap my guitar to my back and go play in nightclubs, or do I go to LA and try my hand at this whole Hollywood or whatever theater thing and something, or do I double into the sciences? And I couldn't figure out what my thing was and what I wanted to do. But I figured early on, like, if I can somehow make it possible for somebody else to accomplish their dreams that they actually clearly have, then maybe I'm contributing in a positive way to this world. Like, again, this is all in a time where I just didn't know what my place was. And I mean, there is a bit of the wonderful thing about there's so many wonderful things about teaching. One of them is that you do get to see those aha moments, like you can see them in real time in front of you, especially when you're doing smaller group teaching. You get to actually see someone obtain a skill and say, hey, that's something that then they can use forever. And it's problem solving, right? Like, why is this not working? When I was working in a special ed classroom, it was they would come in and you do one-on-one or one-on-two, little math lessons and things like that at an elementary school. And that was, okay, I'm a young 20 something. I don't actually really know what I'm doing here, but I can at least listen to what this other person across the way, be they 6 or 8 or whatever, is telling me and try to figure out how do we kind of close this gap and get this lesson, through. That's a fun problem solving thing. And it is a little bit of theater, right? Like when you get into the standing in front of a, a classroom of high school students or of kids and getting them to pay attention and to learn something. I mean, that's okay. How do I captivate my audience? So I think all of those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely some edutainment when it comes to kids.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, and again, I think we talked about improv being a skill, which we'll talk more about, and how it can be applied in a lot of different situations. But I think teaching too is a skill
Mhm.
that can be applied in so many different ways,
Yeah.
from parenting to in the veterinary clinic. Even I think we have a lot of opportunities to be some type of teacher.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's mostly, fast forwarding, of course, many, many years. When I'm doing the work that I'm doing, especially in an ER setting, one of the biggest things that I feel like is, I guess, my goal as a clinician is education. Because, this is a situation where people are scared and they didn't expect to be here and they're not necessarily primed for learning. And they're going to go back into the wilderness of the unknown veterinary landscape of maybe they have a primary vet, maybe they don't. Maybe their primary vet does 4-minute appointments, or maybe they've got an hour appointments. I mean, I don't know, right? So I want to make sure that by the end of this visit, you understand kind of what happened, where you are, and what the next steps are. And then similarly, your team, you want your team to grow and to want to feel connected to the thing that they're doing. And so education is a big part of that. And that could be applied to literally anything. I think that it is our job as people who know things to spread those things that they know to others in a way that allows them to know more things, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that you went into professional improv too. So you
mhm.
and I mentioned you did everything from youth theater, but then you're actually getting into real professional improv work. And so this is probably a world that not many people of the people listening right now know much about, including myself. So I'm curious, do you have a story or a memory from that time that you just remember, I don't know if it was a funny moment. I kind of want to leave it open, but I'm curious that as you're doing professional improv, a story that comes to mind that maybe it helps us understand a little bit of that world and your part in it.
I mean, a professional improviser is really like somebody who's getting paid for the gig. And it's like we think about it as the theater stuff, like, well, we're going to go and laugh at a club at night. But I will say that most of your money is going to be made outside of that environment. So, like, the story that popped into my mind was we did a corporate event on one of those whale watching boats in in San Diego. Yeah. So I think it was called the Hornblower or something like that. And so you're on this like open air, people are sitting in benches and you're out at sea. And like our job was to like do improv for those people who are obviously waiting for whales. Like
We gotta talk the whales.
exactly. So it's like that long ride out to sea. It was us being like, this is so funny. And then like on the way back, we're like part 2 about how funny this is. And it's like, it is so bizarre to do comedy at sea with like the ocean air and like the spray coming through. And you're just like, and these are jokes, everybody. So wild. But yeah, I mean, that's being a professional improviser, right? It's like you do these team building events for the managers at Hilton. Or I remember one of the biggest shows that I ever did, I think it was like 1,000 people in one of those like conference centers or whatever. And it was cool because they were mostly paying attention to us, but then there was an arcade in the background for, just in case that they like brought in, little like Pac-Man and things like that for the executives to play. And so that's most of it. Right. And then the rest of it is coaching. I mean, it's like when you do the shows, you end up you're either paid minimum wage or you're paid, nothing at all, really.
Mhm.
Like maybe a cut of the door. But most of it ends up being this outside stuff. And that's like, maybe that's a prelude to my gig working as a relief doctor. But it's just like you find the money where the money is. And you're like, I guess I'm a professional improviser.
But sometimes that's a good skill set to have is when you're open to opportunities because you
Oh,
never know
yeah.
what's coming.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that money was pretty good. I mean, truly, like the weird whale watching thing, all that stuff. They're like, I guess we'll just pay you a lot of money. Is that sound appropriate? We're like, whatever.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I think the one time I've really seen improv was at an offsite leadership corporate event. I thought it was fun.
And just like for like a peek in, one of the things that they would do is like we would always ask things like, well, so what are some kind of corporate slogans or what are some things that get tossed around the office commonly? And so you'd get all these like sayings that you don't know what they are. You kind of have a gist of what they mean because you've asked. But the game in those circumstances is to find ways to drop those in just naturally
Yeah.
throughout. Yeah. And it's like, and they're like, oh my God, that's magic. It's like, no, I mean, like we asked for that list up front. Maybe 10 minutes before the show, but yeah, that's like how you make those things go, right? Because they're not there for that. They're there to figure out like, oh, we've made some changes to page 27 of the employee handbook, and we're going to review that for the next 4 hours. And so yeah,
You're making this bearable. No.
exactly.
Well, that's actually, stopping and thinking about that, I think that's really cool. You're kind of asking for some inside joke or inside things that you can apply. And I think that, again, playing this to the bigger life here is when you stop and you listen to an individual and you catch the little things that you pick up that are important to them and you pull that back out in conversations, that is magic to them. It's like, oh, you stopped and listened to me. I can tell that because I'm hearing this, but you find those sweet things that allow you to build that relationship a lot faster and you get to that point where you can collaborate better and again build the relationship and make things happen. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of a neat skill that you are already learning to do in a comedy way that you can continue to do in a client conversation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you do pay attention to detail. So one of the things that makes something funny is detail, especially when called back. So, if someone says something very specific about, the outlets being 220 volts, I don't know why that's the example that I'm giving. But
That is
like,
very specific.
if someone says something very specific, like, oh, these 220 volts outlets, like you lock away 220 volts into your brain so that 3 minutes from now, you can bring it back in just some way. And because of that connection that was not expected, now you've created a laugh point. And so, and again, these are small things. You'll see them if you watch for them in every comedy show, like a stand-up comedy show. They'll have callbacks all throughout because of that same type of idea. And so, yeah, if you train your brain to see those types of connections and to lock away details, absolutely, you can use that in. That's one of the things that I think you can use really readily as a tool for bringing in humor into an exam room is just finding little details and then calling them back later. So, yeah, absolutely.
People probably don't think about that being comedy, but yeah, I think that's really interesting. And
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
so far we've teased this improv career, and people are getting that you're in veterinary medicine.
I
So
assume they guessed because of the name of the podcast, though, right?
yes, there's along the way. So bringing into the veterinary side, and we've mentioned you
Yeah.
were interested in human medicine. You had a very unique way of getting into vet med. So, do you mind sharing a little bit about getting the idea that, oh, maybe I'll apply to vet school?
Yeah, I mean, so medicine was always something in the back of my mind, but my mom, like I said, single mom, I was an only child, so a lot of times I would go to the hospital and just kind of like hang out, and no one seemed happy at these hospitals. So every time I thought about like, oh, I'll apply to med school, I just like I couldn't fill out the application. So I took the MCAT, I did all the things, I took all the prereqs, and eventually after I decided to continue going to college, but I just like could never apply. And so this medicine thing always sort of stayed in the back of my mind. I still love the problem solving. I still love that bit of like, how do we do something that takes bad and turn it into, better at least. But I didn't know what that looked like. And I did improv, and along the way, I got a master's in chemistry because like it just was appealing to me. And the girl that I was with at the time, long-term girlfriend, she decided that she wanted to go to vet school. And I'm like, well, we've spent so much time kind of apart, working odd jobs as like 20 somethings, basically trying to figure out how to afford life, that we never really got a ton of time together. And I'm like, wouldn't it be better to have a career where, we actually went somewhere together and did like the job together and then, went home at the end of the day, as opposed to like only kind of hearing about life in these sort of glances. So, I mean, it's a long way of saying like I followed a girl to vet school. It was an opportunity. It was a really interesting field. And as it turns out, one of the guys that I did improv with, Al Atkinson, he was a veterinarian. This is way back in San Diego. And we would trade, like I was technically senior on the team, even though he was older, but also I was quite poor. And so when our dog got sick or got injured, he would take care of her for free. And then I would give him improv lessons for free. That was like our barter system. So, so like I ran it by him, and we had talked about it. And so I guess it was kind of in my mind from there, but truly I probably wouldn't have pursued it if it wasn't for Melissa, my ex. The funny thing, I guess, like the great cosmic joke on all of that is like we kind of went through vet school and that relationship unraveled like 3 days before graduation. So ta-da. Uh,
But you did something together.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. But yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that while you were in the hospital, you watched a lot of people not really enjoying their career.
Mhm.
So, I can't help but think that I hear a lot of people say similar things about veterinary medicine. It's like,
Mhm.
well, I've always had this dream to go into veterinary medicine, but all I hear about is burnout and, financial issues and all that kind of stuff. So at the time, did you hear those things as well getting into vet school and they didn't bother you as much?
Yeah, I think I benefited from ignorance. Because truly, before I went to vet school, the only veterinarian that I ever talked to was the guy that I did improv with, and he loves his career. I did an episode with him kind of way back on the podcast, and like he's now semi-retired, and he still just loves it. He really does think that it's the greatest profession, and so that's the only kind of insight I had. I probably at that time in my late 20s when I applied, I probably would have said like, it doesn't matter, even if I knew. Or like, many of us do, just like, they don't know what they're talking about. And you sort of do it anyway. I think from on the back end of it, there's sort of 2 points. I do think that veterinary medicine is more flexible than human medicine. Just kind of the way that you can practice, a lot of human medicine is very much run by, rules of administration. You're kind of existing within large corporate structures, but also like governed by insurance and all of those things. I would say at this point though, I probably still, if I had known then what I know now, I probably still could have carved out a little piece of the human medicine industry and like not been one of those people. But I do think that we're more able to do that as veterinarians. And so, for me, it's, I guess it's always been figuring out the thing that you enjoy about the profession, veterinary medicine. And it's like, yeah, okay, there are lots of people who are burned out. And I'm not like trying to dismiss them, but it's like in reckoning with that, what it looked like for myself, we can make choices and do basically anything in this industry. And what a luxury we have by having those 3 letters after our names. It's like you can do so many things. Your career doesn't have to look like what you thought it might look like when you applied. So that's what I think.
I completely agree. I mean, that's kind of what this podcast is
Right.
about, is all the flexibility to this
Yeah.
profession. And, it just made me, for some reason, it made me think back about Andy Rourke's episode. His dad was a physician,
Mhm.
and Andy was going towards that direction as well. And his dad basically looked at him one day and said, "Nah, I don't think you want to do this."
Yeah,
do
because
this.
and
'Cause
talking to him, he was talking about basically how his dad, I mean, was a physician at the time where the physicians could do kind of anything. He could be that kind of all around practitioner that, I guess a lot of our general practitioners are right now. But the industry was shifting in such a way that that wouldn't have been the case if Dr. Rourke were to have gone into it himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I still think this profession is extremely flexible, whether you're a veterinarian or a veterinary technician. I'm editing one about a veterinary technician right now. So I think that is something super special about this industry. And I'm glad you saw that early on. And it surprises me sometimes that not a lot of people understand that early on, and sometimes even late on. Sarah Boston even said that in your episode. And she's like, "I've never heard someone in vet med think like this." And it's like, "Oh no, this is fantastic." Like, this is
Yeah.
one of the fun parts of it.
I do think that like I do benefit from not having a plan, right? Like that sounds bad, but I mean, especially when it comes to this industry, it's not like this is something that I've been planning to do forever. And so there wasn't like an ultimate outcome the way that it was supposed to look, meaning that I don't have anything, the disappointment exists in that space between outcome and expectation, right? And because I didn't really have an expectation, the outcome is the outcome. And if I'm unhappy in the moment, kind of like the meta moment, then I'm like, okay, well, what needs to change? In fact, the book that I wrote is like, there's like huge sections on effectively this is like, how do you figure out what it is that you're trying to do and what it is that you want from life? And like, how do you adjust your career to kind of look like that? But I think that that's like true in life, right? If you're not happy eating green beans, like just, I don't know, maybe don't, but it's hard if you're just like, oh, well, every meal is just going to have green beans forever. And like, that's what you come to expect. And I know change is hard. And I know that it's like what I do and the way that I've approached life is not for everyone. I do think that there is like at least some bit of it that is so available to us that you can kind of tap into and just, realize what your expectations are, try to figure out like, are they unreasonable? How do I adjust them? And maybe focus more on your life and less on your career. At least that's the way that I've had to kind of do it myself. So I don't
I
know.
love that phrase, like focus on life and less on career. Because that's why we make a lot of our decisions. It's the life side of things, because life is unpredictable and it changes.
Sure.
And we talked about before we got started seasons of life. So things that we had in our mind when we were in our 20s is gonna probably be a little bit different than our late 30s, because there's just so much that changes, whether it's like just life, human life, but what about economy or, society? Those things all change too. And I think if we're not open to adapting with those things, then I think you get this conflict of your personal values and then the what you're doing day to day in your job. And I think
Yeah.
that's where that's when you get unhappy and really easy to burn out because those things are in conflict.
Yeah.
And speaking of expectations, you went into vet school at University of Tennessee, and you mentioned that you went in not thinking that you would do clinical work, that
Yeah.
you do maybe more academic, pharma, something like that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that, you might want to do a little bit of clinical work if you might teach it, something like that. But do you mind sharing how that kind of changed? Because you got out into clinics, even though that might have been your original idea, and you didn't go back into pharma or academia. So what kind of happened shifting from vet school into a veterinarian?
Yeah, and it did happen so quickly because so the University of Tennessee at that time when I got accepted didn't have a experience requirement. Like there weren't hours, like clinical hours that you needed. So I didn't, I guess I'd stepped foot in veterinary practices before getting into vet school, but for my own dogs and seldomly, and I tried to avoid it, so it was so, there wasn't really like, why would I have done clinical medicine? I just assumed that maybe I would, do something that was kind of more in line with my life, being academia, teaching, doing like the research stuff because I had just come out of like the chemistry thing, why not help build some medications and stuff like that. And the closest that I got was maybe I'll help kind of own a practice with my then girlfriend. That might be a way for us to kind of continue life together and things like that. But I didn't actually consider it in terms of practicing. So all throughout vet school was, oh, you've all seen parvo dogs in practice. I'm like, not me. Can we please describe the symptoms? I'll write them in much notebook. So yeah, I kept moving forward that way. My first time in clinics was in clinics. I was never in a clinic before I went down to the clinic floor in vet school. So that was always the idea. And I guess, and man, the beginning of clinics was so miserable. I just remember again, I almost didn't finish. It was so horrific, especially as somebody who had never done it before. I'm so out of my element. I don't know what I'm doing. This is terrible. Probably somewhere around February of my clinical year, I started kind of getting into, maybe November, I started getting into the swing a little bit, which I actually started feeling like I was contributing positively in my rotations. And then I was on Farm Animal, actually, and I was having a great time, oddly enough, doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
It was so fun. And you're outside and you're like talking to people. And at that point, I kind of knew more things. And so I guess it was around that time where I was like, I came to terms with the idea where I could do clinical practice. Everything before that, I think I just don't think I would have succeeded. And so in April of 2017, thought, I'm just going to go straight into academia and kind of, figure out a way into that path. And then by May, I had accepted a job. And so it was like 3 weeks maybe where I had sort of decided, I think it would make more sense because I know that I can kind of do this, it would make more sense if I had some idea of what I was talking about if I were to go into industry or if I were to start teaching. So that was the idea. And it was never, and there was this job offer. It was unique because another one of my classmates was going to go down there. And then 3 of the third year residents and one of the professors were going to go down there too. Just so happens, right? So it was like, there was enough of a UT influence in that space. It was only a couple hours away. And so I'm like, well, let's give it a shot. We'll do it for a year and see how it goes. And I'm still doing it.
Yeah. You get an emergency position, right? In Chattanooga?
Yes. So, and it was supposed to be, it would have been an internship. We replaced the interns, but they had just got purchased by VCA. And so things were just kind of being, it was just kind of all up in the air. So they're like, it's basically an internship. You'll have support. We'll kind of do the rounds and things like that. The only difference really is that you'll get paid as a doctor. We're like, okay.
Sounds great. Yeah. Was this River?
It was River. Yeah.
Okay. Exactly. That's where I did my internship. So I was one of those very little paid before you that came through. So yes, I was pre VCA.
Yes.
That is where I did my internship. Small world. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Super small world.
Yeah.
Yeah. We replaced interns. There were a bunch of them. I think maybe 4 in the class before us. It was a pretty sizable and busy place. But they just didn't have the bandwidth to do an internship. So it was us 2. And that went weird. It was very
So do tell, because you go into emergency work, and then you kind of also quickly shift into doing relief work, which was very different at the time.
Yeah.
And we talk about relief work a lot kind of now,
Yeah.
but it was new then. So how did you go from a full-time position to doing relief work?
Yeah, so the middle bit is that idea of teaching was still strong in me, right? Like clinical medicine was a temporary kind of holdover until whatever happened next. And so I got this opportunity as what ended up being a teaching fellowship at Lincoln Memorial University, which is in northern side of Tennessee. And so I was doing that simultaneously, starting in about October or so. I did that. So I would like finish up my shifts and then I would drive up to LMU and I would do my, whatever my clinical stuff was, research or doing some teaching stuff or whatever. The thing is, when I applied for the job, I said, "Hey, I'm doing these other projects." I had some like things in the wings, plus the LMU thing that was maybe on the books. And I'm like, I need flexibility. And I know that's weird to ask for as a first year grad, but like, I need the flexibility in order to do these other things. And they're like, no problem at all. But as soon as, we actually started the job, it turns out that that was a problem. And so the flexibility started getting less and less and less. And then I wasn't able to do the duties that I needed to do elsewhere. And I'm like, this can't work long term then. And simultaneously, that relationship that I had ended. And so in that spin of early 30s, not knowing what to do with my life, being an ER doctor and then out of a long relationship, I was like, I'm going to spend as much money as I know how. so, so it was like, all of these things kind of came together. It was like, I heard about this thing where people were filling in shifts in Nashville. I'm like, I would like to try to do that. With the dual intent of like making, some additional funds, as well as really like trying to see, can I even do this medicine thing? Because it was only February at that point. I've only really been practicing for 7 months or so. I don't yet know if clinical medicine even makes any sense to me. I definitely didn't get like the full experiment. So at least let me try it out for the time being. And that ended up being a pretty consistent flow of opportunity. So one hospital would then tell me or tell other hospitals about me, and then they would call, and then I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll fill in there too. Until I was working at probably 5 different hospitals within, Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Nashville, while still working full time and and doing the fellowship. And so I'm like, well, something's got to give here. And so then that transitioned into a full position of relief.
So sounds like I've heard you say this is that you kind of got into this season of yes, and there were
Oh yeah,
just getting a lot of workload,
yeah,
which
yeah, and
I
that
mean it can be a good problem at first because again you're doing something that maybe not a lot of people have known about. You must have been doing well enough that people are helping you by word of mouth that you're available and they were happy with you and you might be able to help other people. So what was that season like of starting this business, relief work business, still new, trying to convince people to do it. And on top of it, you're coming into a lot of different hospitals, all that
mhm,
probably have different ways of working, lots of different people that you're having to work with. And I was actually kind of interested. You mentioned even maybe still today, you still get a little bit of nervous driving to a new hospital or something like
mhm.
that. I'll throw out the term imposter syndrome. We use that a lot in vet med. How are you dealing with this as still a pretty new grad, doing some new things, saying yes to a lot of different things? What was kind of happening right now? And oh, and by the way, I mean, are you still doing improv in all of this, or had that been put aside for the time being, or like
Yeah,
what was this season?
yeah. I mean, that piece had been put aside. I mean, once I started vet school, aside from the kind of the projects that we would do that I would try to put some level of like an artistic spin on, I kind of abandoned the whole theater thing. And there's kind of a lot of reasons why. But ultimately, yes. I mean, what that it gets to is that I kept kind of negating that whole side of my life for a long period of time. So yeah, I mean, I got into this like season of like, let's take the opportunities that are available, in part because like I just didn't know that the opportunities would keep coming, in large part because of exactly what you're talking about. Like I constantly felt like I was fooling everybody who was in these hospitals. Like the people who hired me, I'm like, they don't know how terrible I am. Once they find out, they're going to stop paying me. And so I need enough of a buffer financially to be able to withstand that fallout and then figure out what's happening next. And meanwhile, I'm still trying to figure out why, like what role all of this relief has in my life. Like, why am I filling in these shifts aside from, the monetary value of it? So, so yeah, I mean, oh, and also, sorry, keep in mind that this is a time when relief medicine wasn't really like a thing. I mean, there were people who were doing it, right? I mean, I had heard about it, but when I would talk to new hospitals, they would be like, interesting. So you just fill in on occasion? Like, it wasn't as big of a widespread thing as it is now. And so then you would have to kind of come and you'd justify your existence to new people. And so, I mean, imposter syndrome was running rampant, I would say, for years. So one of the things that I focused on was the thing that I don't know primarily is medicine and like what I'm doing. But what I do know is like how to engage with a team. I do know how to educate. Like, I know about these processes. I just got out of school. I just don't know how to apply anything, right? And I know how to basically create a positive experience for the clients that come in scared and all of that, as well as to the, technicians and assistants who are around me and other doctors who, stressed out. This is their job, who may not be having a good time. So like, I focused on those things. And then for all the things that I didn't understand or didn't know, is I relied heavily on the technicians around me. So like, the majority of my medicine that has ever been practiced with me around is collaborative, right? Like, I need the experience and the insight of those around me to be able to then practice the medicine appropriately. And so I figured that if I could just focus on the things that I could probably do okay because I have this other background, and I can rely on my team to really like catch me when I'm not doing well, or to offer suggestions when I don't think of differentials and all that, then I'm probably okay. But I mean, honestly, it didn't take, I mean, it was probably 3 years plus until I really felt like, oh, I think I might know what I'm doing. like kind of, right? And this is in the depths of 2020, which when now we're like, nobody knows what we're doing anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to highlight some of those things that you said, because I also see a lot of vets that are fresh out of vet school, first couple of years, and they are very stressed out. They feel like they don't know what they're doing, like all these things that you're describing. And so the fact that how you're describing is you stopped and you said, what do I know? What are my resources? The fact that things are collaborative. And I think that's also something we may not talk a lot about, is the importance of collaboration in our roles, not only working with our veterinary technicians, but leveraging other doctors. And it doesn't even have to be the doctor that's practicing next to you. It could be, in other ways as well. I think that is important, that we make sure we aren't doing this alone. And whether it's we're putting that in our mind that we have to do this alone, that we just are supposed to pop out of vet school and know how to do everything. We don't. Even the people who've been practicing for years don't know everything. It's an important thing to have that collaboration. And so again, I just want to highlight that, because when people, and I don't mean if, when people get to that moment of like, oh my goodness, like somebody's going to find out that I do not know what I'm doing, and maybe I should just walk out before they do, or, just being really hard on yourself, knowing some of these things, one, knowing that you're not alone, that people also feel this way, but your resources are, remember what you do know, and you're just out of vet school. I've heard veterinarians say that sometimes the vets that are right out of vet school may know the medicine better than the people who've been in practice for years, because you just read the textbook, right? Yeah. You just sat for your exams. Maybe some fresh things, again, to collaborate and know that this is a learning opportunity. Use your resources, and it's okay. I think those things are important, because I do want to make sure that people don't quit the first time they feel like they don't know how to do something.
Oh, yeah.
That it's part of life. It's part of learning. So sorry to go a little long there, but I think it is important. And again, I've heard several people recently make those types of comments, especially younger veterinarians. But I don't think it's just young veterinarians. I think anytime we make a change, when you put yourself in new situations, you're in new situations. You're going to be learning along the way.
I
You
think
know,
that that's so wise. I think that one of the things that we do is we somehow conflate not feeling great about like what we're doing or about anything in particular and making that conflated with like bad. Just because we don't feel confident in something or just because we feel uneasy or uncomfortable, that doesn't mean that what you're feeling is like wrong in some way. In fact, I would say that it's probably good because it gives you this sort of idea that you want to be better. It gives you information about how do you potentially become better? How do you close a gap in knowledge? Like that's really good information. And looking backwards now, I I feel like I'm currently at the space where I'm at that kind of crossroads of where people become old, bad veterinarians, right? Like where you where you've become comfortable enough in what you're doing, where now you're like most things are not surprising. Most times, even in like ridiculous ER settings, you're like, I pretty much got this. And you could ride that out for the rest of a career. And I like long for the days where I feel uncomfortable in my lack of knowledge, you know? So I think that it's a good thing. I think that, paying attention to it and reframing it that way of like, this is an opportunity for growth, maybe then takes away the bit of like personal, I'm bad, right? Because I feel this way. And it turns it into something instead of like, great, like, look, I paid attention to a thing. I have limitations because obviously everybody does. And then this is a way that I can kind of at least address these particular limitations.
yeah. And so you mentioned it took several years to even get feeling like you were starting
Yeah.
to understand. And so, again, you kind of fell into relief work. What kept you in it? And
Mm.
then I happen to know you are kind of transitioning to something a little bit newer. You're
Mhm.
actually working on a brick and mortar. So one, what kept you in it for so long? And then, more recently, what is the transition into something a little bit new?
So I think what kept me in it is momentum, truly. And once you start doing a thing, it's so easy to keep doing the thing. That's one. The other thing that happens, and maybe this is like a piece of this addresses kind of what we were just talking about. But one thing that happens is that as you walk into these places, you have to be confident for the benefit of those around you, right? For your team, for your medical team, for the clients, like they want to see that you believe in what you're saying. And I'm not saying like be overconfident or overzealous, know your limitations, but like you have to really be objective and honest in that moment and portray and exude confidence even though you may not necessarily be feeling that internally. So when you have the combination of things where you're just like, I'm coming in, this is great, this is going very well, even though you feel like you're lying to yourself, the more you say that, and the more you keep doing this and saying yes to opportunities because you don't know of another, path just yet, you're going to kind of keep doing it. It almost ends up as to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The other piece of it was that whole time I was trying to figure out what do I want, right? Like from life, from a career, who am I as an adult human being on this back end of professional school? Because this is what I'm doing now. And in figuring that out, I realized that actually what relief ER in particular is, it's so much of what I feel like I gravitate towards, right? It's like you jump into the unknown. You're like, cool, this is my situation right now. Let's go for it. Let's be in this team together. And like how you do that in like an immediate way is something, it's a game, right? You walk into a hospital, you create a team within 20 minutes where you can trust each other, as you're doing CPR. And that's like a very interesting thing. Plus you're creating a good experience for other people and people thank you for being there, and a lot of it ends up being really, really valuable. And that I guess is how I stayed in it is I was still trying to figure out, okay, how do it was that same thing with the improv games, right? Where I'm like, how do I make this work? Like, what is the gimmick? Like, what's the equation that sort of guarantees a good introductory outcome? So like when I come in as I'm taking the tour, do I make a joke like to show that you don't have to be nervous around me, right? Like we're all in this together. I don't take myself too seriously. If you make a mistake, the first time someone comes to me with a mistake it's huge, right? The way that I respond because it sets the tone for everything that happens next. All of those little pieces, that's figuring out the equation of how do you do relief work, right? And then once I kind of figured all that out to some degree, I'm like, I guess this is it now. Like, I'm not burned out. I'm not upset. I'm not over it. I just I feel like I've gotten what I need to get out of it. I've played the game. I've figured out the equation, and now I figure out the next thing. And so, the one of the big problems that has come up over and over again as you go to all these different hospitals is employee satisfaction, tech utilization, and people not feeling like that they have a purpose within work, and all of these little things that, communication styles, et cetera, the collaborative medicine spirit. And I'm like, well, I have a lot of opinions about that. Why don't I try to just embody that into a hospital? Like, I got to, I have opinions. I can either try something or I should shut up about it. So I elected to try something. And so that's where the brick and mortar came in. That coupled with, I can't be on the road anymore. I mean, I had already sort of made this decision, but then, Lindsay got pregnant and we had a son. And I'm like, I have to be home. Like, being on the road is brutal. I used to say, like, I would leave. My son's name is Luca. I would leave and, I'd say, bye, Luca. And I would come back and it was a kid named Kevin. Like, he would look so different. He was doing so many different things. I'm like, I cannot be on the road anymore. And so all that stuff together is like, well, I guess this is the next phase of what I'm doing. So that's, when I finished up, I'm like, I guess I felt compelled to write a book. So I wrote a book about it that I'm in the final phases of editing, and that'll be out soon. But, the idea is that it's like, this is kind of the end of this piece. I feel like I've learned what I need to learn, and now I'm going to move on to the next thing. So yeah, the new clinic's called Inkwell, opening in January.
Love that name. And I love that your book is also helping people understand the looking at what your value, who you are as an individual, to help you make those decisions, I think is really neat. And then also, I love the approach that you talk with your podcast, which you started in 2022, which I think it's a little after that time of, I'm starting to figure things out. Mm-hmm. And with that podcast, you approach it kind of as a really looking at the human being. And I try to do that too in my conversations. But I mean, you right out of the gate start more on a, like, how are you as a human being? And from a very personal perspective. Yeah. And so do you mind sharing just a little bit about the inspiration starting that podcast? And I know it's been a little while since you posted, but what were some of the things that you learned having those very deep conversations with people all throughout the veterinary profession?
Yeah, I mean, it started because in the middle of COVID, especially doing the thing that I'm doing, right? Traveling to all these different hospitals, working in ER, specialty referral centers that were swamped, there was this general feeling of, hey, what are we doing? And then it kind of moved into what are we going to do? Like, this might be the new normal. How are we going to survive? And what I found that during that time is, as you'd round the cases from one doctor to another, you'd ask, you're like, how are you doing? Like, are you okay? What strategies do you have that I might be able to take with me to live my life, in these next 12 hours and beyond these walls? And I gained a lot from those, or even just knowing that other people were feeling the same way, that I thought it would be beneficial if other people were to be able to hear these stories as well, to realize just how incredibly human we all are and how human this profession is. I mean, it's a profession of humanity. So that's why, starting the podcast. The other thing is that it's just one of those things, like, it just kept tapping at me. I mean, I had the idea in 2020, but it's like, who had the time? And then it's just like, it kept coming back and kept coming back. And I'm like, man, I have to do it. There is a point in your life where you realize, I'm either going to think about a dream forever or I'm going to do it. And so I'll either die with it on my lips, or I will have known that it is done in somewhere in the past, no matter what. And I mean, it haunts me, right? Like, in general, whenever I'm doing these things, it's not entirely out of like, oh, this will become fun and cool. Sometimes it's like, man, when I die, I don't want to still be saying, I wish that I had done, whatever it is. So that's why it started. In that process, the original intent was, it's called The Greatest Profession. And for me, it was is it, at that time. And it's not that I felt one way or the other, but it's like, you hear in vet school, like, this is the greatest profession. It's the greatest profession on earth. And then you go out and you get burned out, and you constantly are confronted with this thing of like, no, I'm not doing well and I'm not having any fun. And so I'm like, why did they say that? But the biggest thing that I learned in talking to all the people that I talked to is that actually, you know what? Like, it kind of is. That was learning experience through that process. That's not how it started. It wasn't supposed to be like a period or an explanation point. It was like, it was a question. It was an ellipses, maybe the greatest profession. That's not. But over and over again, I just feel like in these conversations, as you talk to people, it kind of meanders through like, and this was tough, and this was great, and this is a challenge, and this is how I'm overcoming it. And then at the end, it would be like, and it really is the greatest profession. And I think over time, I kind of changed my view on it, and now I believe that there's a period or possibly an exclamation point at the end.
Yeah, definitely feel the same way. Now, I think I came into this podcast extremely optimistic and wanting to share all the different things in
Mhm.
vet meds, but with the idea of I didn't want to necessarily sugarcoat anything. I wanted people to
Yeah.
really feel comfortable sharing all aspects of it because nothing in life is 100% Pollyanna, right? There's
Mhm.
challenges and honestly, sometimes that's what makes it fun at the end of the day is to look back on it. Man, I survived that and I
Yeah.
survived it well. Like I handled that well. But having all these conversations, we talk about the things that are so special about it. And I always feel like every episode, no matter how challenging their adventure has been in this profession, you leave on such a positive note.
Mhm.
And so, kind of wrapping up the conversation here, I kind of want to wrap up the what have you learned about you as a human being when you think about happiness? Like, what comes to your mind? And maybe that can be wrapped up in gratitude. That's usually how I end. And how are you taking that maybe into your next step, whether it's, part of writing your book or building this hospital, or maybe just excited to spend more time with Luca? Like, when you think happy and gratitude, what comes to your mind?
Connection is the first thing that comes to mind. And I think that when I'm most satisfied and happy at work, it is from that connection. Like even seeing that the connection is made. And maybe that it all goes back to that comedy thing, right? Like when you see Carol Burnett connecting with, Tim Conway or whatever on the Carol Burnett show, it's like that is where the joy is. And I feel like it's very similar in that environment, especially so working in ER, working in relief, where these are basically strangers, if you can kind of create that connection in that flash moment, I'm like, this is the rush, right? That people might get climbing Everest. I get going into a room where we all think that this is going to be terrible and having people laugh, within that room. And then outside of work too, right? It is something that I feel like I learned in the midst of my ER relief experience, somewhere 2021, where I was working so much and I was focusing so much on the game that was, relief and the game that was making connections in that work way that I had ignored friends and relationships and yeah, and making that transition as it turns out is like really hard. In fact, I live in Colorado. I still practice in North Carolina and Virginia because for me, especially at the beginning, it was so hard for me to create that divide that I literally needed like a whole geographic region to sit in between me and work so that I could be like home and fully present when I was home. So that. And especially now that we have a son, I don't know, I wouldn't have expected it, but that thing that happens when you are, we went out to like a little, it was like a lights and pumpkins and things like that for precursor for Halloween. And just us three walking around and having cocoa and coffee and him playing with the lights and everything. It's like those moments that's what life is about. Um, and that's what I hope to be, moving forward. The whole point of the business that I'm trying to start up, right, is that it's a collaborative team-based approach to medicine that we are connected. And the goal is like, I want to feel like I'm doing something positive, not just in like a medicine way, but like in a people around me type of way. So I guess that.